Schizophrenia is a serious mental disorder that affects an individual's thought processes, emotions, and behavior. The most classic symptoms of schizophrenia involve the hearing of voices or auditory hallucinations, as well as an interference in the thinking processes. Some people with schizophrenia might have what we call delusions, or overvalued fixed beliefs that the person holds despite all evidence to the contrary. The name schizophrenia is actually something of a misnomer because there's no split in personality. What tends to happen is that the person's connection with the outside world tends to be distorted because of the perceptual disturbances or the thought problems that I've described. Jill was diagnosed with schizophrenia a number of years ago and has been hospitalized several times. Initially, she was reluctant to disclose the nature of her illness.
I was adopted when I was quite young to a very good family who cared for me very well. Now, basically, my story as yet is very speckled. I've done lots of different jobs and everything. And I've visited places. I've been to Turkey, I've been to Malta, some lovely, lovely places. I've been all around England. There's obviously lakes and stuff like that. And yeah, I've done all sorts. Worked on the land, factories, lots of education. When I was at my first comprehensive, I was bullied quite a lot at school, which disturbed me to the extent that I went to a different school. And I get on quite well there, when it's till my late teens. I got me O levels, me A levels, me sub levels, me gay levels, me loppy levels, me Nazi levels. I got me performing arts and me creative studies and me options and me NVQ and me city and guilds and me ET and me Romsey singers and many other wingers, but I can't remember them all. Duke of Edinburgh Gold Award. Rap is just an incredible thing for me because it's a way of expressing yourself emotionally, factually, and having a bit of fun with everybody as well. Do you know what I went through for a very long time? I felt homeless and I didn't think I'd done no crime. But now I find myself in Cambridge city town, and it makes me happy to know that I'm based and I have a home. I think the first time I had a little blackout was when I was just, I know, I'm not sure, I can't remember. But anyway, I fell asleep, I sort of blacked out on the sofa. And my mum, she thought I was dead, so she took me to the nurse next door. And they said, oh no, she's okay, don't worry, and I was all right. I think the next significant, I'm just saying significant things that issues might add up to, you know. I find myself in front of the camera, standing by the market. Mark this, you. The market's a nice place to do. You can get here, you can get there, you can get anywhere. Well, to the left is your Guild Hall. The Guild Hall, Miss Hall's my old ma. She worked up there, you know, she used to be the mayor's secretary. I'm rather proud of her for doing that with her best. Dress on day after day. She must have been good at what she say and what she do for that old mayor, so there. My daddy's named Drake, he ain't no fake. He gets around town and London too. He's strong as ever, light as a feather, but he's got his problems like me and you. He's fun to be around, sometimes he's busy, sometimes he isn't, and that's the way it goes with Dad Drake. Dad Drake. Thank you. Yeah, I went to university and did sociology, and I think that was just a bit too much for me, a bit too intense and a bit too deep and everything, and political and stuff like that. But like since then I've learned a lot about the world, and you know, that's that. I actually went into hospital from when I was in the north, and I dropped out of university. They put me in hospital, and I was like put away in this hospital for like weeks, months, with not being allowed to come out, you know, not being allowed to go into even the grounds, and that was really strange. Okay, so I'm with my rap today. They're looking sheer hard and they've got some grey. So here they come for another day in Cambridge town, another day in Cambridge town. Here they stand and they watch the food. They think, should we have a little bit new? We've tried something, but we haven't tried that. Ooh, ooh, ooh. There was a huge crowd of Chinese! Hooray! Hey! Look, there they are. Oh. Cambridge, a town of much education. Many different people coming from all around the world to learn all sorts of things. It has a hum to it, a buzz that makes you feel real, original and special. Like the world should, really. Because believe me, everybody in that world has something to see and something to say and something to talk about. Sports can satiate your passion. Sports can make you fit as a bit. Sports are cool, I think they're fashion, but they can lead to agony. Actually, being honest with you, there aren't many sports I haven't tried, but some of them have left me a little bit creaky at the bones. Sport is fun, and my main love is pool. Pool, all right? I do have quite a weak body actually these days. I used to do a lot of exercise, but I don't do as much these days. And I tell you, I get bad backs, I get cramps, I get like bad knees, and whether it's kind of to do with sport or whether it's to do with like being in the psychiatric hospital and being thrown around a little bit, I don't know. It's probably a bit of both. To be quite honest, my past is my past, and like I don't entirely remember all of it, because like I was being treated with that drug, this drug, and I was being moved from this place to that place. And I think people are really dishevelled sometimes as a result of what happens to them during their mental health problem, you know. I didn't feel alive, I didn't feel real, you know. And I think that stems in with kind of the thing of finding my mother. It's made me feel a bit more, I can understand why this is happening, that's happening, from her letters, you know. We speak on the phone and that, but I think finding her has been good for me, you know. I mean, I've got my mum, who is my mum and always will be, you know, but there's this mum as well, like, who gave birth to me. I'm doing this for the people who are suffering now in the way that I've suffered to get where I am. I'm not saying I'm a saint, I'm not saying I'm anyone famous or whatever, but I just think it's nice for people to get on. Down by the riverside, gonna walk with the princess. I would say I'm a wanderer who has settled. I would say I'm a pigeon who has flown its last fly into a quiet garden, and I'm just resting now, writing my poetry, having my friends. I ain't gonna study one no more.
Jill now manages her illness with medication and by participating in a number of different daily therapeutic activities. In 2002, Henry Cockburn was diagnosed with schizophrenia. 9 years later, he provided the world with a remarkable insight into his illness. His father, Patrick Cockburn, foreign correspondent for The Independent, author and expert on the Middle East, suggested that Henry write his experiences down in the form of a book, while he and Patrick's mother, Jan Montefiore, Professor of English and American Literature at the University of Kent, would tell his story from their perspective.
I sort of ran away from society. I wanted to see what life was like on the other side of the tracks.
In February 2002, Henry Coburn attempted to swim the New Haven estuary. He was rescued. Nevertheless, that swim has completely altered his life and the lives of those dearest to him.
I was in Kabul, I remember, and I got a call on my satellite telephone to Jan, my wife, and she said that Henry'd walked from Brighton and had tried to swim the estuary. This was the middle of January in New Haven, and had been rescued by fishermen and was all right, but was now in the Priory and had been diagnosed with mental illness.
Well, it was grim having to break the news, yes, but I can't say it was a difficult decision, you know. The thing that was difficult, of course, was that in those days I couldn't ring Patrick, so I had to wait for him to call. And I knew that when he did call, I would have to tell him what was up. That was difficult. But, you know when you've got to pass on news to your husband, you do it, you know. It's not like telling the world. It's telling your husband something he needs to know.
Until his New Haven adventure, Henry had been studying art at Brighton University, where teachers regarded him as a promising painter. A recent exhibition of his work in Canterbury demonstrates his considerable talents.
This is one of my latest, On the Streets of Cork. It was painted in Ireland. It was, it's a busker. That was done in a hospital. It's flower power, I suppose. It's going like that. And there's a flower there in the middle. And this is a sailor who I knew in Ireland. Who I did that when I was 15 or 16. No, maybe 16 or 17. And yeah, he commissioned me to do one, so I earned some money in the summer doing that.
Schizophrenic patients may suffer from paranoid hallucinations and hear voices. Henry, for instance, communicated with trees.
Heard voices from trees and things. Just conversation. I don't ask them to do things for me though. I see the trees and the brambles and stuff as God, you know, or maybe more than gods.
The doctor, the consultant, said that he'd been diagnosed as having the initial phases of schizophrenia. Now, I sort of knew that schizophrenia didn't mean just a split personality, but that's about all I did know. But I went back to my hotel and looked it up in the online and found a mass of material and started reading, and was kind of appalled to discover somebody, I think the US Surgeon General, describing schizophrenia as being to mental illness what cancer was to physical illness. And that's the moment that it struck me that this was extremely grave and was going to go on a long time. And I certainly didn't realize how poor hospitals were at making sure he'd taken his medication. For a long time, maybe 2 or 3 years, he wasn't actually taking the medication. You know, for a time what changed was that, you know, he'd have these breakdowns, that he'd have what he called polka dots, you know, great waves of guilt, that inability to concentrate. He'd run away, he'd take off his clothes, he'd behave, you know, more and more weirdly, and also couldn't look after himself, plunge into icy rivers, and so forth. So for a long time, my wife and I, you know, thought, you know, is he going to survive this? This is, you know, you can get away with this so many times. At one point, your luck will be out. I remember Henry once sort of calling up and on the mobile phone, and I said, "Where are you?" And he said, "I'm in a railway siding, you know, with trains rushing past." All these things were really pretty dangerous.
Henry, as many patients who have been committed, found ways of avoiding taking medication and wanted to be free. But he was more successful than most. He escaped from a series of institutions, 30 times.
I think architects always leave a little way out. There always has to be. There's always a way out. It's scary though. You feel your heart beating and stuff. And then when you don't do it, you feel like, I seriously believed that once I'd escaped, I'd be all right on the outside, and that I'd just, get a job or something, and live on the outside and never come back. But in reality, I always sort of ended up going back to hospital.
In addition to painting, Henry also possessed writing skills.
It happened as so once Henry started taking the medication, got better, and he was in London, we were also walking around, and we were talking about it. And Henry could sort of talk very fluently and articulately about what had happened to him. And also I thought, Henry needs a practical project to do. Not something that's kind of invented work, but something that's real. So, and something you can do. So initially we sort of wrote a big newspaper article together. But what I didn't want it to be was Henry telling me what was wrong with him. And one of these sort of as told to books, because I thought it would lose the flavour of what had happened to Henry. So he wrote his part and I wrote mine. And I'm sure that was the right thing to do.
Every weekend I'd come home and I'd write a chapter. Yeah, he sort of nudged me to write it though. It's a bit like a diary, It wasn't like writing an essay. I had to plan it all out. Everything came naturally. I liked it. I'd like to do more stuff like that.
On February 8, 2002, I called my wife Jan by satellite phone from Kabul, where I was writing about the fall of the Taliban. It had been snowing, and as I leaned out the window of the guest house where I was staying to get better reception, I felt very cold. Jan's voice sounded thin and distant, but more anxious than I had ever heard it, and I felt a sense of instant dread as I realised there had been some disaster. I could not make out the details, but I grasped that Henry, our 20-year-old son, had nearly died when he swam New Haven estuary fully clothed, and was rescued by fishermen as he left the near freezing water. The fishermen feared he might be suffering from hypothermia, and took him to a general hospital in Brighton. The police had been called. They had decided that Henry was a danger to himself. He was now in a mental hospital.
I had started out that morning from Art College, a tall building opposite the market near the London Road in Brighton, walking barefoot along the edge of the sea. I went east towards my home in Canterbury. I felt the brambles, trees and wild animals all urging me on. It was as if they were looking at me and I could feel what they thought. I walked 10 miles, sometimes going by the seashore and sometimes across fields. Once I was tempted to steal a motorbike I saw beside the road, but a voice told me not to. When I was in New Haven, I hid under a heap of ladders. I felt people were following me. I went to the estuary and hid behind a low wall. I didn't want to go into the water at first, but finally I did get in and somebody shouted, "You stupid bastard." I thought I was going to die. I saw brambles everywhere. It was about 20 yards across, and after I got to the other side it was freezing. I was underneath the jetty and there were steel girders. I went back in the water. That was where a fisherman put out his hand. The next thing I remember, I was in an ambulance with no windows being taken to a hospital in Brighton.
We talk about his illness. He says wryly that being an art student seems likely to leave you in the mental hospital. Several other people he knows that are ex-art students, or else musicians.
Henry afterwards told me that he'd taken a great deal of cannabis when he was a teenager. I knew he'd taken a bit, but I'd never realised how much he'd taken. And also at that time I didn't realise that there was a sort of connection, which even at that moment was only beginning to be proved, between consumption of cannabis at a very young age, 14, and the mid-teens, and developing mental illness later.
I don't think my head's messed because of all the cannabis. I don't think I lost my mind because of cannabis.
While it may be difficult to cite many positive aspects of schizophrenia, Henry is pleased about one outcome resulting from his illness.
Well, one of the good points about me being in mental hospital is it brought my mum and dad back together, because my dad was always off in the Middle East doing war reporting. And when I got ill, he realised, I needed him. So he came back, and now they got a new bigger house, where he's got a study so he can work at home and stuff. So there have been positives.
Henry's mother and father share Henry's pleasure at how the family has come together.
Someday gonna have a kid and a wife, but until then I'm just gonna live my life.
Chalice, white rocks, sniffer dogs and cops reaping the crops from my tea to the block. Yeah, I go after the gold and the silver too. Yeah, I stay true. You see my face on the news, no clues. Yeah, I rearrange with the ace. Well, that's my face. Yeah, I ain't sniffing the bass. I come back with a new plan. Goddamn. Feeling of fulfillment when you do a good rap. A bit proud of yourself. Hope is more of a tangible thing than you really expect it to be. So I should look, where I was 7 years ago to where I am now. It's a hell of a lot better. So maybe in 7 years' time, I might have a girlfriend.